It's Quarantine and Stations, March 25th, 2020. Here with, I'm Adderall, and I'm here with a bunch of friends. I'm super excited to have Tiberius back. Always happy to talk to him.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, and we have Dirk with us. Always happy to talk with Dirk.
What's up, my man? How are you doing?
What's up? And Caleb's here, along with McLeod and others. Thanks, guys, for showing up. All right. Sorry, go ahead, McLeod.
So what?
There you go. Now people know what you sound like.
Hey.
All right, before we get started, actually, I want to ask Dirk, what'd you do this morning?
Took a ride. I got in my vehicle. I woke up early. I didn't want to wake my wife up. And so I just got up and went and got in my car and took a ride out through the country. And it was very Walking Dead out.
Walking Dead. I love that.
Seriously, it's like it was, I don't know. It was like 8 o'clock in the morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time or whatever. And it was just, just like there were a few cars kind of coming and going on the state road I was on at first. But then I kind of got off into some, more back roads and whatnot. It's like, didn't see any movement. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like looking around and I'm going, yeah, that's a good position over there. That might not be a bad place to flee to if need be.
That's defensible.
Yeah, that's defendable.
So you were literally out looking for dumbs.
No,
underground military bases.
No, I was really just out, kind of just trying to get out of the house and just sort of take a ride and keep distance and all that kind of stuff. But also just just get out of the house for a second, and not be in a place that not the house, but not like, oh, I'm going to Walmart.
I'm going to Walmart.
Seriously, those pictures, I think they're eerie as fuck. They are scary. Completely empty streets. Someone did a skateboarding during the quarantine where they were just out just skateboarding over all the roads that were completely fucking empty.
And we were kind of talking about it just right before the show there. But that what was that show called? Time After People.
Earth After People.
Yeah. It's like they've actually shown some things out there, right? I think it was like Venice, Italy, or whatever, right? Where it was like you could actually see the bottom of the canals because the water's not being churned up, and dolphins are coming in closer to shore, and and then I'm sitting there thinking, well, does that mean great whites are also coming in closer to shore? But
yikes.
But it's like, I don't know. At what point do you start seeing grass growing in between the cracks of the sidewalk?
Nature's taking over.
Yeah, nature's taking over again.
First person to see a deer like in the middle of town. It's like, oh god, it's happening.
Yeah, there we go. Life after people.
Yeah. Well, the planet will be happier.
Well, and they have said, in places out there, right? The pollution obviously is, and then of course, I see this thing. It's like Corona did more for the environment than Greta Thunberg ever thought possible.
and funny fact is, as I've treated, I think the animals are kind of confused at the fact that there are no people around anywhere and they can just roam free. And on the other side, the flip side is the dogs and the cats are really happy because their owners are home all day.
Yeah, totally. They're happy as can be. What's going on?
If we find
it was a nice, peaceful drive, and it's just nice to get out and kind of just go see some things without putting yourself or others in any form of contact or whatever.
If we find out that cats can transmit COVID-19, they will become even more evil in the eyes of people than they are already.
We have to coin and name this shit, Dirk. We have to call it Corona Cruising.
Corona Cruising? Well, I don't know. That's got its own.
That's got other connotations, man.
Yeah, exactly.
That's already taken.
Cruising. Yeah, cruising is it's. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah, I'm thinking
don't blow his mind.
Thinking spring break, Corona Cruising. Okay, so
not quite.
Yeah, so you went out there, you looked around, Walking Dead or Life After People scenario. Well, what's going on with Italian mayors and them screaming at people that they find out there as they go around? Have you guys seen those videos?
Yeah, some of those are pretty funny. And obviously, you could probably pull some of that out from a number of places. But it's, I think maybe for us as Americans, sort of hearing it, this Italian guy yelling and whatnot, maybe it adds a little extra humor to it. But they're being serious, right? Like they obviously have got a very bad situation over there in parts of Italy. And they're saying, look, people are out there kind of like just abusing the go out and go to the store for something, right? No, we don't mean go to the store and just pick up a pint of milk and then come home, because that was just an excuse to get out and go do something. Don't be running your dog into the ground because you're using the excuse of your exercising. I think one of the mayors said something like, "You're not Will Smith, and I am Legend."
With your dog, yeah. I thought that was funny. There's another one that's saying if you're going out to this must have been a while ago because they must have been locked down. It's like you're going out to get your hair done, you will die. Perfectly waxed, but you will die.
Yeah, exactly.
But the funny part, it's a tragic situation, and it's just so like the world has changed so much that it's funny to see that people are taking turns with a dog. Like this happens in Spain too. My relative was telling me that people are trading the dog off so they can take a walk. Because that's one of the only reasons.
Exactly. Yeah, because I guess the rule is no, you shouldn't be out there just walking around. But if you have to walk your dog, so therefore, like if one dude has a dog and like the other 4 neighbors want to borrow it to go take a walk, that poor dog though, you know what I mean? He's like, and maybe he likes being walked, but maybe not 9 hours out of the day or whatever.
Yeah, the dog's probably like, I shouldn't have barked at the door so much in the past.
He hears walkies, and like normally it would be like all smiles and wagging tails and stuff. Like now it's like he hears walkies and literally runs for his life.
Oh, who are you whoring me out to now?
Yeah, totally. I'm a one owner dog, man. Oh yeah. Anyway, so that's some stuff going out in Italy and Spain mostly, because if you've been to Madrid is like pretty densely populated. People live in high rises, a lot of them residential high rises, and those apartments are kind of small. It's Europe, and it's also densely populated situation. I guess New York is the same way, so you don't have a lot of space to yourself.
Yeah, I was just saying. I mean, obviously Italy and Spain. And again, I think that there are some cultural things that may go on. Like with Italy, what was one of the reasons that it may have passed so rapidly over there, right? A very kind of family, socially communal get together for dinners and things like that, right? That may have led to sort of it spreading the way that it did. One of the reasons, right? I don't think there's any one reason why it happened. But certainly Italy, Spain, and I mean what you're seeing here in the U.S. in terms of a major metropolitan area like New York City, and even the metropolitan area around that, northern New Jersey, the part of Connecticut that I'm originally from, and where my mother still is. These are kind of highly dense areas where that outbreak. The epicenter here in the U.S. obviously now is the New York City metropolitan area, and to the point where even Dr. Birx sat there and said, people leaving New York to go someplace else really need to self-quarantine themselves for 14 days, because they're coming out of the hot zone, and that's kind of a legitimate thing, I think, which gets into the whole thing of when you look at sort of like what Europe has done and other countries have done, right, with closing down their border to traffic, generally speaking, even to neighboring EU countries, right? Does it come to a point, let's say here in the United States, where we got to do that too?
Yeah. By the way, you should note that Spain, like Italy, has already surpassed China in deaths associated with this virus. So that just happened today for Spain, but it happened a while ago for Italy. Just to give you some numbers, China's death toll from this is 3,281.
I would be
the reported death toll.
Yeah, I would be highly skeptical about the information that China puts out. China is very much similar to the way that communist Russia was back in the 60s through the late 80s.
You talk about how about Russia right now? Russia right now apparently has like 8 cases.
So, yeah, I would just be highly skeptical about that data because the Italian government is the first government that has had this pandemic kind of on a, not necessarily on a runaway scale, but on such a large scale that is similar to China that would be, I would be really.
So it should look more like Italy than it does.
I would suspect that it would, that realistically it should look more like Italy. But unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever get those numbers unless there's a leak high in the government.
All right. And that's the voice of Tiberius, who's a physician who's been watching this all the way through, actually contracted the virus himself and is passing through it now. So actually, we wanted to talk to you about just some things about what's in the news. Maybe talk about how the virus works and stuff.
Yeah. And so this disease is called COVID-19 or coronavirus for short. It is a offshoot of the severe acute respiratory syndrome. And it is, the full name for it is the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus 2 that causes the disease coronavirus. It causes the disease that has been classified as COVID-19, but everyone is now just calling coronavirus. My objective as a medical professional has been to try to dispel some myths and misinformation that is being spread about the disease in order to benefit the public health.
All right. What can you tell us?
Well, first of all is that one of the main concerns that a lot of people believe is that the virus itself is what is killing, and that's not necessarily the case. So the virus actually infects what is known as your epithelial cells. Your epithelial cells actually surround the vast majority of your organs in your body, and also pretty much every major part of your body has some form of epithelial cells. And epithelial cells basically just act as a first line of protection for your body, and it prevents other major things from happening. It's like a shield in order for your immune system to respond to. And the disease has the biggest impact whenever it infects your lungs. That is why it is one of the reasons why they call it other names that have been kind of like become colloquial for it are either the Wuhan flu or the Wuhan pneumonia or novel coronavirus pneumonia is what a lot of the medical professionals are calling it, because the way that it infects people is very similar and acts very similar to the way that a pneumonia would.
So this thing causes an pneumonia, but it's a viral pneumonia, not a bacterial pneumonia.
So it's actually it's more of a bacterial pneumonia in and of the sense that the virus destroys the virus and immune response actually destroys your epithelial cells that then can suscepts or allows for a bacterial pneumonia to form. So when a virus enters a cell, the virus will basically hijacks the processes of a cell and basically tells the cell to make infinite copies of itself until it bursts. And then when it bursts, the virus goes on and does the same thing, hijacks more cells, and that eventually your immune system will respond to it. Coronavirus is actually so infectious that it actually can infect a large portion of your immune bodies. So your white blood cells and a number of other immune cells that are responsible for taking care of your body. And when that happens, unfortunately, it sends your immune system into a bit of a frenzy / panic, because once an immune cell gets infected, then your immune system kind of realizes, oh, okay, well, we really need to step up our game here. And your immune system is really good at destroying unhealthy cells, but it's also really good at destroying your own body cells. So imagine like a bomb per se. So if somebody was like standing 2 feet in front of you, and then you put like 5 sticks of TNT in front of you, not only are you going to kill yourself, but you're going to, not only will you kill your enemy, but you also kill yourself. And that is unfortunately how some of your immune bodies react, which can cause, damage to yourself.
Isn't that what happened in 1918, which they say this resembles? Is that the what's something storm, where your body, its reaction to the...
It's called a cytokine storm.
Yeah.
And basically what happens is, so your body because your immune cells need to be able to communicate with one another. They communicate through cytokine proteins. And it's basically like a form of, it's a rudimentary form of telepathy. And they are able to communicate information back and forth between each other. And when immune cells get infected with a disease, it creates a cytokine storm. And when you have a cytokine storm, your immune cells overreact to such a degree that you waste a ton of resources. And that's when you come into issues here. Is that this disease is generally considered a bit of a perfect storm to a certain extent. Is that because of its infectivity and its ability to interfere with bodily functions, and the amount of time is required for this disease to come to fruition and come to a full halt. Normally, for example, like the mean time, just to kind of give a good example, the mean time for the flu is approximately 7 to 10 days. However, the mean time for this disease to come to a full stop in your body to be able to fully recover from it is anywhere from 15 to 18 days.
That's a long one.
Right.
So we should probably clear up some other things too. This isn't just an old person's disease with underlying health risks. They're not the only ones that should be afraid of this.
Oh yeah. So from the limited data that the Chinese government has actually given to us, there has been some startling information that has come to light that is not really has not really been talked about too much. So one of the things that has been discussed on a regular basis, through either radio talk or even in the early days from some world leaders here in the United States with our Congress, and even some of our governors have related this disease to the seasonal flu. And it's a little disconcerting that it is being it's being compared to the flu for the wrong reasons, because it has similar symptoms to it. it's not, but they're not really taking into account the what it does to the body. And I think the number one thing that people are comparing it to is like, oh, well, it's an old person's disease. Well, that's not necessarily the case. From the data that has come out from China, I'm actually looking at it here, for all-cause mortality. So I'll just go through the flu versus COVID-19. So for all ages, the seasonal flu, the mortality rate is approximately 0.1%. For people 0 to 17 years, the mortality rate is 0.004%. So that's 0.004%. So that's like that's almost like at the odds of winning a scratch off to a certain extent. If you add a couple more decimal places there, you're looking at a scratch off ticket winning type stuff here. 18 to 49 is 0.02%, still incredibly low. 50 to 64 is 0.6%, still incredibly low. And then 65 plus is 0.8%, which is still low, but it's enough to cause some concern. So as of now, and I would like to stress that this is because this is an ongoing pandemic. These numbers are not concrete, and they are subject to change at any point, whether higher or lower. And that it's really, really hard to nail these down. But based upon the data that China has given the United States, and based upon the fact that they are a lot of people believe that they're on the tail end of their infections at this point. The all-cause mortality, based upon the data from China, is 2.5% for all ages. So that is 12 to 24 times higher than the flu. That's for all ages. 0 to 19 years is 0.1%. So that's the same percentage point as people with flu, as the data from all-cause mortality from people with flu from 2018 to 2019, which is 14 to 25 times higher than the flu in the United States. That's for young people. 20 to 49 is 0.3%, which is 6 to 16 times higher than the seasonal flu. And 50 to 59 years is 1.3%, which is approximately 9 to 21 times higher than the seasonal flu. And 60 plus years is approximately 60%, or sorry, not 60%, 6%, which is 4 to 7 times higher than the seasonal flu. So this disease is nothing like the seasonal flu but maybe in the novel sense that they share similar symptoms.
Well, yeah, the symptoms are the same, or look the same.
Right. But it does not affect the body nearly the same way or nearly at the same rate as the disease.
So we really shouldn't. I guess I'm bringing that point up because I've heard it a lot. Even my own family has said, "Hey, it's just a strong flu," and I was like, "No, this is SARS. It's different."
Yeah.
There's no real comparison as to how seriously you should take this.
So yeah, so the last time the world saw SARS, it was the novel. It was another novel strain. So novel basically means that it's a new type of bacterium or virus that has not been discovered yet. So it would be like it would be like when a new species is discovered, so to speak. So it was another novel strain of this virus, and I believe it was back in 2008. But the Chinese government did an excellent job of actually containing the disease. but they were able to study. They were able to get a lot of information about how SARS actually works. But SARS is very aggressive, very, very, very aggressive with the way that it spreads, and it can. It's not. It's not the. It is not the disease that kills. Sorry, it's not the virus that kills you. It is the underlying factors that cause. It's the secondary symptoms that are following from the disease that happens after the fact.
Which is true for most viruses, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent, yes. That's not entirely the case, but yeah, I would say as a general discussion, yes, I would say that it is a good way to look at.
Because it's really you making you sick, right? Just take something like the normal flu. What really makes you sick and gives you most of the symptoms is pretty much your immune system reacting and responding.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, well, yeah, the other reason I wanted to bring that up was that I think in Los Angeles County, was it? Yes, it was Los Angeles County. We registered our first under 18 fatality, I guess.
Right.
So
the unfortunately, this disease really capitalizes on people with underdeveloped or poorly responding immune systems. And in a lot of cases, you may not know that you have an underdeveloped or poorly designed immune system. We live in, fortunately, we live in a first world country, and a lot of people aren't necessarily exposed to diseases like this, and your immune system on a large scale, especially with how infective this disease is, cannot keep up with both ends of it. So what the main problem is that when after I'll give you just like imagine like patient X. So like if patient X has all of his epithelial, he has a hole in his epithelial cells inside of his lungs, and now it has exposed his alveoli inside of his lungs. His body is still fighting to get rid of the coronavirus, because that is what is the most infective right now. However, because it's focusing all of its attention and resources on the coronavirus, it's not paying attention to the bacteria that is starting to fester in the alveoli of your lungs, which is the pneumonia that is forming. And by the time that your body has either significantly reduced or wiped out the majority of the coronaviruses that are floating around in your body, now you have a severe pneumonia that is developing. And a severe pneumonia, if left untreated, is very, very, very bad for your body. And you can easily go septic very quickly because of the way that the lungs interact with your bloodstream, because it obviously has to inject inject oxygen into your blood. So there's opportunities for bacteria to get into your blood. And the minute that you go septic with a bacterial infection, it's very, very likely that the patient is going to die. Septic shock is very hard to come back from, and it takes a lot of resources, and it's just not something that people can generally come back from. And that is what has been killing the majority of the patients is septic shock from pneumonia.
That's maybe the first time I've understood how it works and why the pneumonia, not ammonia, but the pneumonia, is why it's so deadly. So your body's fighting this virus off, and by the time it's finished, it looks back and it's already too late because it's
Right. So
drowning in poison.
think of your immune system as like an army. Your army has limited resources. It has ammunition, it has food, it has water, it has gas, it has all the things that are needed in order for your immune system to work. By the time that it has completely eradicated the the coronavirus from your body, it has completely depleted, if not all, its resources from your body, and it can no longer fight at such a capacity anymore because it's been literally trying to kill off the coronavirus for upwards of 2 weeks. Like I had said, like anywhere between 13 to 15 days in total.
And as you kind of mentioned with the cytokine storm stuff, right? The battlefield is also one of the major issues after an infection of any kind, right? Your body needs to clean out all the mess that's left behind. This is also why you get things like kidney problems and stuff like that. It's just a perfect storm when you get a virulent strain like this, and then all the follow up stuff, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So there's two things that could happen with the kidneys. Just to touch on that real quick. So the virus actually has been found in other places like your intestines, your spleen, and your kidneys. It's just, unfortunately, your body has multiple places in which for the receptors of this virus to attach to. So the first way is that it can just normally be there, and it can possibly attach your kidneys. But the second way that you were describing, which is that your body's natural way of getting rid of dead tissue or dead cells is usually through your kidneys. It gets filtered out of your blood and then passed through your urine in your kidneys.
One question I do want to ask you here, because it sort of came up in a couple different ways out in the chat there, about can the virus kill you, or is it what the virus causes kills you? Or complications due to what the virus, like the virus itself isn't what, when they report virus deaths out there, deaths due to coronavirus, right? Like,
Yep.
What does that include?
So that includes the disease is called COVID-19. It is the disease is the process in which what happens when your body contracts the coronavirus. COVID-19, the disease process is what that's kind of like where people are getting confused, I think, a little bit, is because they associate the disease COVID-19 with coronavirus. Coronavirus is just easier to come off easier to roll off the tongue. People are dying of the disease process of COVID-19, and you're not necessarily dying from the virus itself. It's not taking over your entire body. You're dying from the disease process and what it does to your body. I'd say the grand majority of people that are dying from this disease are dying from septic shock from pneumonia.
And now
it's like I mean, if you want to use an army kind of or sort of like war reference, it's the equivalent of like, not dying to the army that's sieging your castle, but dying to the fact that you've been basically sieged for so long that you're dying of hunger and other things that are associated with the siege.
Now, as to the pneumonia itself, is that does it show up as, or is it what I'll call a normal pneumonia, or is there something different about this pneumonia? Because I was reading something a while back about radiologists at Mount Sinai that had looked at a number of CAT scans from Chinese patients, and they could literally tell the difference between somebody who had developed pneumonia from this versus other forms of pneumonia.
Yeah. So the the trouble is that normally when you develop a pneumonia, it's in a very limited capacity, and pneumonia is typically very easy to treat. But because it usually only happens in such a limited capacity, because the coronavirus is so infectious, you can have pneumonias in multiple different sections of your body, multiple different sections of your lungs, and it would be, very, very hard to. It would, yeah, it's very difficult in order to treat multiple different parts of a pneumonia. So I think that's what really differentiates itself, is because the coronavirus is so infectious. That is what causes. That's why I think that's why it's so different and why it's causing so many issues.
Wild. Real quick, you've been through this, right? Your body has fought that fight, continues to fight it, and it looks like it can be fine. What are some of the symptoms that are exclusive to this thing that you can identify?
So let me actually pull up a definitive symptom list here, so that I'm not just giving you anecdotal information. Here we go. So I noticed in the early stages that I had a very mild fever. I think the highest fever I had was a 99.6. And I was feeling a little fatigued. Like I just felt like all through the day, I had felt like I had done a 12-hour shift. And I just gotten off a 12-hour shift, and I was really tired, been on my feet all day.
Could you feel the fever, or did you have to measure for it? How mild was it?
I felt kind of feverish whenever I woke up. I think that was probably the best time that I could really describe it, is that it was usually when I woke up. And I had a mild cough, but I got to say that I had very, very small. I had a very, very small reaction to this. However, my son did not. Unfortunately, he ended up having a fever of, I think the highest I went was 102.1, and he was coughing up a storm big time. And he was pretty tired all the time. So I think that's another kind of bit of misinformation that's being passed around right now by the media, is that I think that according to the CDC and information that's being reported, the top 3 highest symptoms of this disease is fever, a dry cough. So that basically means that you're producing sputum, which is basically the mucus that you would normally like cough up whenever you have an upper respiratory infection. That would usually either be like green or brown in color. So that is not that's not something that is typically associated with this disease. So yeah, fever, dry cough, and fatigue are the top 3 symptoms. And sputum production is reported in about a third of the cases, but that's not. It's kind of like just barely at the threshold for statistical importance. A lot of other things that are being reported are diarrhea, nausea, or vomiting, but those are, I guess, more typical in the sense that the disease has been known to go into your gastrointestinal system, so that includes your stomach, your large intestine, and small intestine. But that typically those infections are typically pretty rare, and that's the reason why the symptoms are usually much lower in terms of that happening.
But that's back to the whole underlying condition stuff, right? If you're already weakened in some sense in some of those systems, the likelihood of you getting it infected by the corona is then higher, right?
So not necessarily. The pathway of infection typically follows the way that the virus enters your body. So, from what I understand, and from what has been reported by the WHO and the CDC, this virus doesn't typically live on surfaces as long as maybe some might think. Again, that information is they haven't been able to sufficiently prove this in a laboratory setting. It's not something that they are, it's not on their main priority list at the time for the time being. So that's not something they necessarily know. But what they do know is that it's spread mostly through droplets, which comes from the mouth. And whenever you cough, whenever you sneeze, so on and so forth. And then, so let's say like maybe you touch, what's
or
that?
Or hot breath, right?
Right, hot breath. So like when you expel your breath, like you take a deep breath in and then you expel it out. It can ride the air particles for a little while because whenever you expel breath, you have spit particles basically that
Is that
can
what
float on the air.
the 6 feet is to get out of somebody's breathing range and coughing range?
To an extent, yes. That is the average range in which your body can. So if you cough, you're putting a lot more force behind the air that you're putting out of your. So that is and that's generally speaking how far, on average, your body can expel these particles into the air. So then it would either touch your eyes, your membranes of your nose, or your mouth. And what you were describing, Caleb, where it infects other parts of your body, that actually happens whether or not it goes down your esophagus into your stomach, or whether or not it goes into your lungs. And that's not something necessarily that you can control. But they know for a pretty solid fact now that this disease is almost entirely and the entry vector for this disease is almost entirely through the eyes, nose, and mouth.
Yeah, and just to compare it, other viruses that can attack your intestines and your stomach, where you get issues, right? The point is that they're not easy to infect with. It takes an effort. It needs to be like in and on your food and stuff like that. You kind of have to cross-contaminate yourself with these things to get those effects, right? And when you start getting sick, most people start eating less, and then they won't be as likely to cross-infect themselves, because getting through to the stomach for most viruses is actually quite difficult because there's a lot of defense on the way down.
So I actually would like to take a chance to answer a couple of questions here. So Gamer Girls actually asked the question, what about the loss of smell and taste that people are starting to? So that's actually, I feel like that's more of a sensational, thing that's being reported in the news right now because they need something else to talk about. I'm not going to discredit it as something that is possible. That could be something that ends up becoming, something regular for the disease. But I kind of firmly believe that it's like one of those instances in which it's just something that they're reporting on because there's maybe a few cases of it in which doctors are reporting on it. If there's a significant statistical percentage that starts to appear, then I would start taking it a little more seriously. But for now, I think that it's just another one of those like fluke symptoms that's happening, and is that the media is reporting on.
I mean, how much of that could just be, I don't know, if you got a stuffed up nose?
Yeah, that's entirely true. When you lose your sense of smell to a certain extent, you also lose your ability to taste. And the way that they're interlinked is they're very, very close to one another. So there's possibly that that it is attributed in some way, shape, or form there.
Are there other questions in there you wanted to answer?
Nothing that I can see here. If I had a very mild dry cough and very, very mild fever a week ago, what's the chance that the corona was passing through? There's a possibility, but I would again, I've said this on numerous occasions to not only my friends but also my patients, is that we're approaching, especially in the northern hemisphere, we're approaching peak allergy season. If you're feeling like you have a very dry cough and like a mild fever, there's a high possibility that you may just be having hay fever. If you feel like that it's going on for longer than expected, the worst. The only thing you can do to know is just go get a test. And governments are doing a really good job of testing people now. So
if you feel like you are having sort of slight allergic reactions or slight sort of like hay fever kind of reactions, if you take things like antihistamines and it doesn't go away, is that kind of a something that you should sort of consider maybe going and getting yourself checked?
Yeah, I would say if you have the capability to do so. So Spot actually said he can't get tested unless he's hospitalized. So yeah, that's still unfortunately a thing in some states. I would say that if you're taking antihistamines and it's not going away and you're exhibiting I would say at least 3 symptoms of whatever it is that you're whatever it is that is on the list of known symptoms, then I would try to go and get tested for it.
That's a good question that just came up about the NSAIDs.
I'm sorry.
Where to go? There was some discussion going on about NSAIDs like ibuprofen as opposed to using Tylenol if you are. And then
over-the-counter medication. So that was, and this gets me really frustrated every time I talk about this. This actually came from anecdotal evidence that had no there's no scientific evidence to back up whatever it is that he said. And it actually came from a tweet from a French health minister, I think almost 10 days ago now. And he got absolutely railed by the scientific community because there's no evidence whatsoever. And the over-the-counter medication could be used to relieve some of the symptoms that people are describing, because cough, fever, and chills / not feeling good, body aches or fatigue. Those are all symptoms that can be relieved off of acetaminophen, which is Tylenol.
Yeah, but surely you don't want to actually do that, because like the idea of this disease is you don't want to treat the symptoms and ignore it. You want to actually make sure you isolate yourself and
absolutely
get medical professional medical assistance if you need it.
Yeah, absolutely. See, it's really difficult to really kind of describe this, and I'm not going to give medical advice in a public forum because I don't want to lose my medical license.
I get you.
But you should take with a grain of salt. If you have been tested and you know that you have the symptoms, you should self-isolate. If you're not experiencing severe symptoms like a constant cough, you're not coughing up blood, you're not coughing up a ton of sputum, you're not short of breath, you can use these drugs in order to alleviate some of these symptoms. Now, I think some of the other confusion that comes from from this particular disease is that there's from the acetaminophen, is the fact that it can have it does not mix well with the retroviral drug that they're talking about, the anti-malaria drug. that our president seems to be so keen on pushing.
The fishbowl cleaner.
I'm sorry?
The fishbowl cleaner.
Yeah.
Compound.
Yeah.
Terrible.
So, even the Surgeon General has really kind of been skeptical about using this disease or using this drug in order to treat this disease. So basically, what they're thinking about doing with this drug, and I haven't actually looked into this too terribly much, so take with what I say with a grain of salt. They're trying to use this as basically kind of like a condom per se for this disease.
A prophylactic.
Prophylactic. Thank you.
Boys and girls.
Yeah.
Prophylactics are not always ribbed for anyone's pleasure.
Right. So basically, this what they're thinking that it can do is that it can act kind of like PrEP for HIV. PrEP for HIV basically reduces the opportunities for HIV in order to be transmitted on a regular basis. It's had a very, very, very significant effect on the way that HIV is spread, and through limited evidence and a very, I would say, almost kind of like biased study, there has been shown that this retroviral drug that is used to treat malaria has had some degree of prophylactic effect, that the same way that that PrEP would for HIV.
And you're skeptical, in a word?
And Tiberius, you may want to use your medical credentials to tell the people, don't self-medicate ever.
Yeah. Please, for fuck's sake, don't fucking self-medicate. For fuck's sake, yeah. Like, and I, for legal disclaimer, for myself and for protection of Matt, I am not your fucking doctor. Please go talk to your doctor. For God's sakes, don't take what I have to say as medical advice. It's my opinion.
Teleconference with your doctor. Now, excuse me. Sorry. I just took a sip of something and I got caught. Anyways, are there things you can do out there to help improve your immune system? Does vitamin C, help in situations like this? I'm literally just asking because I know people that are sitting there popping vitamin C,
Yeah, definitely. Keep the immune system up, kind of thing.
So, obviously, having, your daily vitamins and minerals, I think will have some degree of effect. But a lot of like the emergence and other off-name, weirdly branded stuff is typically very placebo. And it's a really good way of selling snake oil, in my opinion. I'm not a big fan of supplements, never have been. It's a really good way of blowing sunshine, happiness, and rainbows up people's ass in order to try to make money. And beyond getting your normal intake of stuff, like by eating your fruits and vegetables like you should be doing, I don't think that that's necessarily going to be helping. The best thing that you can do for yourself right now is to stop fucking smoking. If you're smoking right now, and you're concerned about what this disease is gonna do to you, you need to stop smoking right now. This is a really good chance while everyone is in quarantine. I think a third to like a half of the country is currently under like stay-at-home orders right now. I know it would suck, but it's better to have a really crappy withdrawal over the next couple of weeks, with the help with maybe some over-the-counter nicotine medication, to stop yourself from smoking, and possibly get the benefits of stopping smoking, than to just sit around and think that you're going to be okay. Because there was a lot of evidence to suggest that the people who died in China, a lot of them were smokers. and a lot of them had already caused a pretty significant amount of damage to their lungs.
Now, and as somebody who is a smoker, let me also ask, since we've got other since we've also got other forms of things out there, right? I mean, look, for 100 years now, everybody's been saying, quit smoking, whatever. But like, what about I don't know, smoking the weed? What about vaping? What about any of the other forms of THC inhalation products that you can get out there? Anything you pump into your lungs, kind of.
I am not a big fan of smoking weed. I know why people do it. I'm against it medically, just in the sense that what it does to your lungs. That's one of the things that people don't talk about, is what it does do to your lungs. It does the same thing that smoking cigarettes does. I realize that not everyone smokes weed nearly as much as smoking cigarettes does, but it does do the same thing. I know why people do it. I have no problem with that. It's not something that I'm necessarily against. I just know what it does to your body. So if you stop, I think that people generally should stop smoking weed. And
inhalants in general, I suppose, right?
Yeah, I think just inhalants in general are probably, I think, should be off limits for while this pandemic is going, because even though people say that vaping is inherently much better for you, and it is to a certain extent, there have been instances in which people have caught pneumonia with this vaping stuff, is because these guys are literally like, I would say this typically has been happening more with people with like these huge batteries on their vape things, that they're able to up the ampage or wattage, whatever it is that they have to do in order to get like a huge cloud. And what's happening is that they're vaping so much at such a high temperature that they're literally burning away their epithelial cells inside of their lungs, and they're catching pneumonia because of it.
Oh, yikes. Now,
yeah.
So even if someone that was a smoker a week ago stops today, will that help, or is it too late for someone? Don't they need a
Yeah, you'd be surprised at how fast your body can actually recover from smoking. I don't have the information in front of me.
Give yourself
basically your oxygen intake should be better just from quitting
your body
from day
but
to
your
day.
Body also can recover all of the your body can actually start mending. So it's like constantly injuring yourself. So like let's say you have a cut on your arm. Here's a good way of example, or a good way to describe it, and how I typically describe it to my patients. If you have a cut on your arm, you're not going to rip the scab away because you know that the scab is there and it's designed to heal. Well, because your lungs are inside of your body, you can't see those scabs, and it's not necessarily a scab per se, but your body is going through what is basically a scabbing process. And if you continually rip away the scab every time a new scab forms, your body's not going to heal. It's not going to be able to heal that cut. And if you stop smoking, even if you've been smoking for 20 years, your body is actually going to finally be able to heal itself. And, while it's not going to be able to heal back to full capacity, it's still going to heal itself to a degree that in which your body has not been accustomed to for the past 20 years.
Okay, so it's everything counts.
Right.
All right, let's move along to something that you want to describe, which is more like the societal issues with this disease, and how things are going to get really bad if we don't, as they say, flatten the curve.
So, if you can pull up if you pull up the first one that you have there, that graph that you're looking at is a very good representation of how the healthcare system would work in terms of how this disease goes. So On the first graph that you see, the guys like whatever, it's just a flu. You'll see that there's a high number of cases, and you'll see a dotted line that goes through the graph, and it's labeled healthcare system capacity. What you're unfortunately if in the instance in which in the first graph happens, unfortunately, what you're going to see is that those number of patients is going to there's going to be a significant number of those patients that are either going to die or have a large. They're going to end up having some issues later on in life. If it goes untreated, and in the medical world, there's a term called triage. And basically what happens in triage is that medical professionals have a horrible, terrible responsibility of deciding who lives and who dies based upon how old the patient is, how salvageable they are, what their underlying pre-existing conditions are. Their job in that instance is to preserve as many lives as they humanly can. And it is a terrible, horrible responsibility that nobody wants to have to deal with. And normally when you're dealing with triage, the only time that's really happens is in pandemics like this, but also in military aspects. The last time that medical professionals generally had to do something like this was the bird flu pandemic in the 50s. And a lot of those medical professionals are no longer alive or no longer practicing, so they don't have the experience that goes along with that. And triaging patients can have a pretty traumatic effect on medical professionals because their job is to keep people alive. And when they can't do their job correctly and people are dying, it can have a pretty traumatic effect on them.
Sure.
The second graph, where you see the nice lady says, washing your hands, not touching your face, and staying home when sick, is basically showing that the infections obviously rise, they get higher, but it still falls within the healthcare system's capacity in order to operate. And it's obviously it can have a strain on it because it's approaching maximum capacity, but at least they're not having to do the things that are happening. I mean, right now in Italy, for gosh sakes, they're in Italy. I think they're having that same issue right now, is that they're just having such a huge number of severely critical cases that they're having to triage their patients.
And let's just take this back a step, because it's all about flattening the curve here. Let's take this back to the ridiculous notion that the comparisons to the flu, right? The normal flu, that over the course of any given year here in the United States, I don't know what it's like in other places, right? 30,000 to, at extreme cases, I think we've seen something like 59,000 cases, of death, right? From the regular flu. But the whole point is to have a curve that your healthcare system can keep up with, right? That we don't have spikes like that just from the regular flu. And that is one of the differentiating factors, regardless of whether or not we turn up with, in a 1 year period, the same number of deaths. You just don't want that level of stuff all at one time.
Right. So, and another thing that is not talked about is the inverse curve of the healthcare system capacity. So if you were to look at the first graph and to imagine the fact that if you were to then look at the dotted line of the healthcare system capacity, in the first graph, if you were to think of a U-shape dip inside of the healthcare system capacity, that would actually happen in that instance, because you're going to have healthcare workers that are going to be getting sick themselves, and they're going to be, and then they're going to run out of supplies. They're not going to be able to treat as many patients, so on and so forth. So the second graph that you're looking at there, if you want to jump back to that, The second graph that you're looking at there is the spread. You're looking at the spread of the disease. So in the first graph, you're looking at in the first scenario that we discussed, where there's a large number of cases and the healthcare system, gets overwhelmed. The second graph, the green graph, is the one that I think the rest of the world is really trying to aim for with all of the lockdown procedures that they're following right now, which is, there's a spike in the number of cases that happens, but eventually the number of cases flattens out, and then eventually it kind of peters out. The third one, where it jumps back up, is where a lot of healthcare professionals are concerned of what's going to happen, especially in some of the more capitalist countries, like here in the United States, and possibly in certain countries in Western Europe. Whereas, it's like, okay, well, we managed to, it's petered out, so we're going to go ahead and open the economy back up. And let everyone go back to the way things were. But unfortunately, there's a possibility that this ends up becoming, there's, I guess, what they call a second wave pandemic, where it will end up going back to, there's the steps and procedures that we put in place in order to protect people, literally did nothing and to prevent the further spread of the disease. And that's one of the myths that needs to be dispelled across everywhere, is that we're in this for the long haul, and people need to understand that economies recover, but dead people do not. At this point in time, lives are more important than the economy. And I don't want to get super political. I try not to get political. But I think people here in the United States and abroad really need to, be pushing their representatives so that they understand that this is what needs to happen. Yeah. I've done everything I can here to really kind of convey that to the state government, and I feel like it's had a positive effect here in the medical community. A lot of the people who have been consulted on this from the Texas State Department of Health and Human Services have felt like the governor has been really open and understanding of what needs to happen with everything here. So I'm confident that Texas is on board, but I think everyone else needs to really kind of focus on that.
So let's just describe the graphs real quick for people who can't see them. Probably should have done this first. But as you were describing them, the first one is a large spike that overwhelms the imaginary line of capacity that hospitals can handle. That's the scenario that Italy's in, and that probably Spain is in as well. And they have to turn away patients. They can't give them treatment because they're at capacity or beyond. Then they have to pick basically winners or losers. And so what you want to do is you want to make sure you never hit the point where you surpass capacity to help heal people. And you do that by spreading out the course of the virus over a longer period of time. And you do that by staying away from each other as long as possible. There will still be infections, but they'll be a lot slower, and then the system can handle it. And the second chart that you're talking about has a small spike at the beginning. It goes down to almost zero, and then it shoots way up past capacity later in the year. And I believe that's what happened in 1918, that you had the flare up of the we'll call it the Spanish flu that hit. It went away mostly during the summer, at least in the northern hemisphere, I think. And then it really came back in the fall really strongly. And that's where it killed the majority of the people, I think.
Yeah, so that was the second wave of it. And I don't remember exactly how the epidemiology of the flu of 1918 happened, but I believe there was a third wave towards the end of the winter. And it basically followed that exact same graph of what you were describing, which is that there's a sudden surge after the initial outbreak. So that is what we need to be really careful of, is the fact that that happens, because that is when patients are getting triaged, is when people die. We have the capability, in the case of 1918 flu, they didn't have the technology that we do now. So obviously, there's a lot more instances in which people are going to live. But anytime that you have an instance in which the healthcare system has to triage patients, you're going to have people that unnecessarily die, and it's a real tragedy. But that's the way that it is.
Right.
And when your health services in triage, like, it's not just patients who are infected with the the current pandemic that end up dying. It's people who may just need regular medical attention for other ailments, other diseases, other things that normally the the health service would be able to deal with, but can't because they're in triage.
Right.
Right.
There was
That's correct.
something that Tiberius mentioned that I think deserves a little bit of expounding. He said that a medical professional having to triage has an adverse effect on that individual. Like they have to make a decision between who lives and dies. And there's the when we refer to the capacity of the healthcare system, we're not only talking about hospital beds and supplies, we're talking about the ability of the people actually participate and make good decisions. And the more the healthcare system is overwhelmed, then the harder it is for these people to make good decisions and remain in a good frame of mind.
And just to kind of give, I posted something I would like to share, just to kind of give a good frame of mind. This is based upon the data that has been accumulated so far. What you're looking at there is approximately 20% of cases. So that's one out of every 5 people are going to need to be hospitalized or medically supervised. So this is not, not 1 out of every 5 people that accumulate the flu are going to need to be hospitalized. So, you're talking a huge number of people. And this is where the triage comes from, is the fact that there's just a huge number of people that need to be taken care of medically.
Yeah, and this is also a lot longer, and it requires isolation plus respirators, which is what the big scramble for respirators is. It's just, it's and it's not even here yet, is it? I mean, it feels like this is still the calm before the storm.
Right. So this is one of the reasons why I think what's happening with the government, and while our president has been reluctantly, pushing for some of these things, I feel like the state governments have done a really good job of coming together and having some of these things and doing the things that they're doing, which is basically saying, nobody should leave. Nobody is allowed to leave their homes unless it's absolutely necessary, which means going to get food, going to work for emergency reasons because you need something in order to work from home, or doing necessary functions. So if, like, you're a doctor, you're a nurse, anybody who performs necessary societal functions is allowed to go to work. And that's under penalty of law, and I think that that's the right thing to do, because
Not just a suggestion. It's probably
because it right now we're really trying to aim for that graph that we talked about earlier, where it's got a slight uptick of cases but slowly peters off until it finally dies out.
But it's also that we are so interdependent on everyone else on the planet taking these measures and actually fixing the situation. Because if just 1 or 2 starts lapsing, right, then it's just at risk of spilling back over to everyone else again. So we have to think of this from a global point of view.
It appears, or at least the perception that I've had, is that the more local the government, the more dialed in they are, as opposed to policy coming from the top, from the federal government, and then trickling down to states and cities. It seems to be going the other way around, and the federal government is following suit only when the states make decisions and kind of set the tone.
Let me.
And this is how the United States works. If you look at this structurally, we want a fast response to this. If you take a top-down approach, you say, I'm going to treat every city, every rural, every farm the same and give them the same rules, it's not going to work. If you say, I'm going to set the policy, and then all the local leadership has to check in with the federal government to get approval on their specific details, that takes a lot of time. So what we have right now is a suggestion from the top, and then each municipality can apply the rules specific to their scenario. New York City, for example, will have different rules, and they do have different rules than stay-at-homes at rural locations, where you can still achieve the result, but being specific to the environment and the needs. When you issue a statement for New York City, you don't have to worry about having exclusions for tending farms. But if you live in a rural, you're looking for things like that.
And part of the solution for America is pretty much going to have an issue with the fact that you can't close down states, really, right? So if everyone is not kind of moving according to some similar plan, you risk having this whole cross-contamination issue that then just restarts the whole thing, just like the curve pretty much shows, right?
I think we're getting there, though. I actually think we're getting there. But hold on. I want to go back to Tiberius. He wants to finish this point, I think, on how it spreads, the exponentiality of it, if that's a word.
Yeah. So and to kind of like to finally hit home, this is the graph that I put up here as a really good example of why isolation is a good thing, and why the government is doing so is because of what you're seeing here is one patient, and this is what they understand to be true, is that the R naught is approximately 3 to 4. So what that means is that the patient, a single patient in a room, I can't remember the exact dimensions of the room, but the infectivity of a patient in a room with 10 other people means that they can infect between 2 and 4 people by themselves. So what you're seeing here is one patient infecting 3, those 3 patients infecting, approximately 10 to 12, those infecting to 30, and then, onwards to like 40 to 50 here. And then it shows it again. It shows that, when people are intercepted, they say this person worked from home, didn't go to the barbecue, didn't fly domestically, or stayed home. And you notice that at the end result of it, the number of patients is drastically reduced by a margin of basically 2/3 of the number of patients is reduced. So this is, while quarantine is never fun, this is why it is proper for us to do this.
All right, cool. I want to thank you, Tiberius, for giving us all this information, going through it really slowly, so it's very understandable. Some of it's review, some of it was very new, and a lot of it was very clarifying. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that. We're going to open up the floor so a lot of people can discuss some stuff, and in that way, we'll do that for maybe a half hour, and then we'll stop and go to Today and Eve Online. Okay. Tiberius?
I had one last thing that I felt like would be good to show on the stream, or for people to listen to, however it is they're listening to. And I feel like it's something that should be spread to everyone who wants to understand coronavirus, or to anybody who wants their parents or friends or neighbors or coworkers or anybody to really get a good summary of how this virus works. I'm sending this to each and every one of my patients ever since this was released. I've sent it to my parents. I've sent it to my brother-in-law, all of my in-laws. I've sent it to everybody. And I really feel like that this is a really, really, really good representation of how this disease works.
All right, cool. This is an 8-minute video. So we'll take a break for 8 minutes while we play this video, and then we'll be back. And then we'll have a little bit of discussion, and then we'll move on to EVE Online stuff. So we'll go ahead and play this. Again, Tiberius, thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
In December 2019, the Chinese authorities notified the world that a virus was spreading through their communities. In the following months, it spread to other countries, with cases doubling within days. This virus is the severe acute respiratory syndrome-related coronavirus 2 that causes the disease called Covid-19 and that everyone simply calls coronavirus. What actually happens when it infects a human, and what should we all do? A virus is really just a hull around genetic material and a few proteins, arguably not even a living thing. It can only make more of itself by entering a living cell. Corona may spread via surfaces, but it's still uncertain how long it can survive on them. Its main way of spreading seems to be droplet infection, when people cough, or if you touch someone who's ill and then your face, say rubbing your eyes or nose. The virus starts its journey here and then hitches a ride as a stowaway deeper into the body. Its destinations are the intestines, the spleen, or the lungs, where it can have the most dramatic effect. Even just a few coronaviruses can cause quite a dramatic situation. The lungs are lined with billions of epithelial cells. These are the border cells of your body, lining your organs and mucosa, waiting to be infected. Corona connects to a specific receptor on its victim's membranes to inject its genetic material. The cell, ignorant of what's happening, executes the new instructions, which are pretty simple: copy and reassemble. It fills up with more and more copies of the original virus until it reaches a critical point and receives one final order: self-destruct. The cell sort of melts away, releasing new corona particles, ready to attack more cells. The number of infected cells grows exponentially. After about 10 days, millions of body cells are infected and billions of viruses swarm the lungs. The virus has not caused too much damage yet, but corona is now going to release a real beast on you, your own immune system. The immune system, while there to protect you, can actually be pretty dangerous to yourself and needs tight regulation. And as immune cells pour into the lungs to fight the virus, corona infects some of them and creates confusion. Cells have neither ears nor eyes. They communicate mostly via tiny information proteins called cytokines. Nearly every important immune reaction is controlled by them. Corona causes infected immune cells to overreact and yell bloody murder. In a sense, it puts the immune system into a fighting frenzy and sends way more soldiers than it should, wasting its resources and causing damage. Two kinds of cells in particular wreak havoc. First, neutrophils, which are great at killing stuff, including ourselves. As they arrive in their thousands, they start pumping out enzymes that destroy as many friends as enemies. The other important type of cells that go into a frenzy are killer T cells, which usually order infected cells to commit controlled suicide. Confused as they are, they start ordering healthy cells to kill themselves too. The more and more immune cells arrive, the more damage they do, and the more healthy lung tissue they kill. This might get so bad that it can cause permanent, irreversible damage that leads to lifelong disabilities. In most cases, the immune system slowly regains control. It kills the infected cells, intercepts the viruses trying to infect new ones, and cleans up the battlefield. Recovery begins. The majority of people infected by corona will get through it with relatively mild symptoms. But many cases become severe or even critical. We don't know the percentage because not all cases have been identified, but it's safe to say that there is a lot more than with the flu. In more severe cases, millions of epithelial cells have died, and with them, the lung's protective lining is gone. That means that the alveoli, tiny air sacs via which breathing occurs, can be infected by bacteria that aren't usually a big problem. Patients get pneumonia, respiration becomes hard or even fails, and patients need ventilators to survive. The immune system has fought at full capacity for weeks and made millions of antiviral weapons. And as thousands of bacteria rapidly multiply, it is overwhelmed. They enter the blood and overrun the body. If this happens, death is very likely. The coronavirus is often compared to the flu, but actually, it's much more dangerous. While the exact death rate is hard to pin down during an ongoing pandemic, we know for sure that it's much more contagious and spreads faster than the flu. There are two futures for a pandemic like corona: fast and slow. Which future we will see depends on how we all react to it in the early days of the outbreak. A fast pandemic will be horrible and cost many lives. A slow pandemic will not be remembered by the history books. The worst-case scenario for a fast pandemic begins with a very rapid rate of infection because there are no countermeasures in place to slow it down. Why is this so bad? In a fast pandemic, many people get sick at the same time. If the numbers get too large, healthcare systems become unable to handle it. There aren't enough resources like medical staff or equipment like ventilators left to help everybody. People will die untreated. And as more healthcare workers get sick themselves, the capacity of healthcare systems falls even further. If this becomes the case, then horrible decisions will have to be made about who gets to live and who doesn't. The number of deaths rises significantly in such a scenario. To avoid this, the world, that means all of us, needs to do what it can to turn this into a slow pandemic. A pandemic is slowed down by the right responses, especially in the early phase, so that everyone who gets sick can get treatment and there's no crunch point with overwhelmed hospitals. Since we don't have a vaccine for corona, we have to socially engineer our behavior to act like a social vaccine. This simply means two things: not getting infected and not infecting others. Although it sounds trivial, the very best thing you can do is to wash your hands. Soap is actually a powerful tool. The coronavirus is encased in what is basically a layer of fat. Soap breaks that fat apart and leaves it unable to infect you. It also makes your hands slippery, and with the mechanical motions of washing, viruses are ripped away. To do it properly, wash your hands as if you've just cut up some jalapenos and want to put in your contacts next. The next thing is social distancing, which is not a nice experience, but a nice thing to do. This means no hugging, no handshakes. If you can stay at home to protect those who need to be out for society to function, from doctors to cashiers or police officers. You depend on all of them. They all depend on you to not get sick. On a larger level, there are quarantines, which can mean different things, from travel restrictions or actual orders to stay at home. Quarantines are not great to experience and certainly not popular, but they buy us, and especially the researchers working on medication and vaccination, crucial time. So if you are put under quarantine, you should understand why and respect it. None of this is fun, but looking at the big picture, it is a really small price to pay. The question of how pandemics end depends on how they start. If they start fast with a steep slope, they end badly. If they start slow with a not-so-steep slope, they end okayish. And in this day and age, it really is in all of our hands, literally and figuratively. A huge thanks to the experts who helped us on short notice with this video, especially Our World in Data, the online publication for research and data on the world's largest problems and how to make progress solving them. Check out their site. It also includes a constantly updated page on the corona pandemic.
All right. That's the video.
Nice.
Yep. So that's probably the best, most informative video I have ever seen on this particular thing, and it does a really good job of calmly explaining like what's happening, how it does things. It does, at least without getting super technical on a lot of these things, so that people understand what's going on.
I liked understanding how soap actually breaks down the fat layer around the virus.
Right.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I feel like people knowing that is very empowering, so that they know that, it's almost like it's like, to a degree, like brushing your teeth, right? Like, you don't really realize how important brushing your teeth is until somebody has like broken it down and explained it to you.
And then it might be helpful to get people to use soap more and alcohol less, because you're going to mess up your hands if you keep using alcohol all the time.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point because everybody's like, well, I'm not going to mess with soap. I want to go to the hard stuff. I really want to kill this virus. So they go to like the gels, you know, the antibacterial gels and the Clorox wipes on their hands.
Well, I mean, and it's fine to use those, but those are meant to be, I would say, kind of temporary. Like if you're mobile, if you're around, if you cannot wash your hands after having done something that you should have washed your hands, then hit it with that. But typically, you should be washing your hands when you have the ability to.
Yeah, I have the sanitizer. I have it in the car, so after I get gas, for example, I'll use that because then I'm on the road.
Because you don't want to go into the gas station bathroom and wash your hand.
It's almost worse.
It's basically when you don't have access to water, right? Then you can use the alcohol sanitizing stuff. But if you have access to water and soap, just wash your hands thoroughly.
And if it is drying out your hands, it doesn't mean that you can't use a little bit of lotion on your hands, guys.
It's also the proximity. It's not just wash your hands, go to the store, and then I look down an aisle. There's a whole bunch of people 2 feet apart from each other, all coughing. And I'm like, nope, don't need this aisle.
Not going to work. All right, now we can talk about politics and budgets. And because now, like, you know, the government's never seen this kind of problem in our lifetime. So they're having to react to it too. And I think you had Dirk, you were on top of this, right? You got the House bill and you looked at it and you were telling us about it. But it seems like they've settled on about a $2 trillion relief bill.
Yeah, well, and let me preface this by saying, you know what, I really hate talking about politics right now because I know that it is prime time, Euro time, and a lot of the listeners out there are not US, and we're strictly going to end up talking about what's going on here when some of those other countries are also probably doing their own forms of, you know, changes and stimulus and all that kind of stuff, right? But yeah, you know, forget the House bill, that doesn't matter. It looks as though the United States Senate has come to an agreement on a $2 trillion. You know, I don't even want to call it stimulus. This is an aid package that is going on. It's a relief package, exactly. Yes, it obviously has elements, but it's less about stimulus as much as it is about you know stemming the wound, so that we don't just crater, right? So that individuals don't just crater, but also so that the companies out there can seek some form of relief and you know, by way of loans and things like that to continue operating. And even there, you know, I again driving around, right, you know, or just from what you should know in certain places out there that may be on various forms of lockdown and things like that, it will not be shocking in the least if you lose 50% of your kind of local restaurants and retailers and things like that, unless they can get access to kind of loans to be able to carry them over, right? So that's what's going on here. It looks like they've got a deal. It should be signed by the Senate today. Who the hell's Colin?
and this is just back to something that was mentioned by Eric in chat. One of the things that we really need to consider when we come through this thing is we might need to allow things that are actually not real productive to die. When it comes to banking and finance and venture class stuff, all of these things that don't actually produce anything real, we can live without them because we can rebuild them, right? But if we start losing actual real people, actual real productive stuff, like the people that take care of us, the people that make our food, that's not going to be easy to recuperate from. So that's where we should focus. And this is not really a left-right policy stuff. This is just sanity. This is just what you do.
What are they doing in your country?
Well, like Tiberius said, you know, economies can recover, dead people cannot. So,
Caleb, what are they doing in your country?
We're lifting a bit from the bottom and then doing some guarantees for businesses. And well, we've basically been on top of this from the beginning. We've made that big package.
What country are you from, first of all?
I'm Danish. We did a big package, pretty much guaranteeing everyone's income level when it comes to labor and stuff like that, because a lot of people are not able to actually work from home. So many of them are, of course, getting laid off. But then there's guarantees of up to, I think it's 75% of salaries up to a certain point. So pretty much everyone will be able to survive and pay their bills. So in effect, that's also indirectly saving all the businesses that are dependent on people's salaries. So when we're talking about things like rent and stuff like that, if people can't pay their bills, the people that are depending on bills are going to lose their jobs eventually. So it's just going to be a horrible trickle effect of a death spiral for the economy. So saving the economy from the bottom up is really the best solution. And again, if this draws out into an 18-month or 24 months period of endless bashing of this thing, then letting the top fail. We don't need to have air flight vacations 3 times each year. That's not a necessity, right? And then how do you then figure out how to save the lives of the people that are going to become unemployed, because we're trying to save real resources and the real economy by getting rid of some of these things, right? Or at least waiting and spooling them back up when we're on the other side. This is back to when Dirk and I always keep talking. I'm actually a little bit of a leftist capitalist, and he's a little bit of a rightist capitalist. And I just think we agree quite a lot on some things should fundamentally not be operated by big business and monopolized, right? You don't want healthcare being a private business, because there's just from the standpoint of a capitalist point of view, there's a conflict of interest in there, right? I'm doing healthcare, but I want to make money. That means the more people are sick, the more money I make. That's just not a good situation. Same with jails, right? If I'm making money from having people in jails, I might actually support laws that are not necessarily good for society, because I want people to be more incarcerated. It's just
what you're describing is a corruption of cause.
It's just that you never want a situation where a capitalist business model is at odds with the general good, and this is what you can get when you have these things. This is why Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, pretty much said there's some things you should never make into a private operation: the military, law, and infrastructure. Right?
Yeah, I don't think he mentioned healthcare, but you know,
it was not invented yet.
If I can get a little high concept for a minute, what we're seeing is when things are good, then systems don't have to be very, very well designed. They kind of just chug along, and things kind of just chugged along. We had our status quo and it was fine. And we were exposed to something terrible happening like this, and we were unprepared, but it hadn't happened. So we were fine. And now all of a sudden that there's a crunch and everything matters, then the fact that we have this system that relies on money to operate the way that it does, we are just simply thoroughly unprepared for this. We're not ready for people just not being able to produce. And we're not ready to say, you know what, let's put rent and mortgages and interest and all this stuff on hold and let all of the debt collect up at the top and at the governmental level and deal with it from there. Because again, as was said earlier in this show, economies recover, dead people don't.
And let me say, because I don't want to turn. I don't want this to be turned into kind of the Democratic primaries or anything like that. And then begin to debate whether or not this system or that system is better. Because right now, I believe that you can probably go out there and find examples of utopian systems. Air quoting. You can't see me right now. That are also failing at this. Okay. I don't necessarily think that when it comes to dealing with a pandemic, that any one particular system out there is the one that you're going to point at and go, oh, look, there it is. Because all of them cost money. It's only a question of where that money comes from in any of it. But none of them are inherently prepared to deal with something on a scale like this, or certainly worse.
Well, what about Turkestan?
Turkestan would just let people die.
Either I'm dumping you over the border.
That's Dirk's fictional land if he were the president. Yeah.
So at some point, you need to see if you can't get it made as an actual computer game. It would be like the hardcore version of EVE Online.
But no, I mean, all jokes aside, I mean, I think that right now you can look at places out there that have, some form of socialized healthcare that are not doing very well. When you look at, and I don't just mean Italy and Spain. I mean, when you look at kind of the deaths versus, cases and things like that, and even a place like the Netherlands, and somebody out there from the Netherlands could maybe explain to me, why that is. I'm not yet willing to sit there and say, "Oh yeah, this is the thing that proves the point on the American healthcare system." And I'm not talking about individuals and how they end up paying for it. I'm talking about the ability for the healthcare system to respond,
but
figure the bills out later.
But the
Well,
psychology,
the situation is.
the psychology
the
of
point is
somebody
that-
being able, hold on a second, the psychology of somebody feeling like they can actually request a test as opposed to, I'm on my own. I shouldn't spend the money. If I get sick, I have to wait it out at home anyway, and I'll only go to the emergency room if I get really sick. Like that psychology is part of the cultural net that keeps you from falling through. So socialized states, I would imagine, would have a broader net that would help people say, I'm valuable to this country, so therefore I can get tested without it really costing me a bunch of money. I would think there's some psychology advantage to having a more socialized system. Anyway.
Plenty. The point is that when Doug asks about specific countries and stuff like that, you have to take into account that this thing does not necessarily roll out in some uniform way where every country gets hit in an equal way from the point of view of the disease, right? You're going to see very big differences. And then how that then evolves is very much dependent on what is happening in that country, what capacity, what behavioral patterns and things like that. Like you're seeing this extreme mortality rate showing up from Italy, which is really freakish to look at, right? But something went wrong. There was some sort of perfect storm, and we won't be able to know in detail what that was until we do a proper post-mortem. And there's a very strange skew in the Danish cases where it seems to be like 10, almost 20% more males getting it than females, right? So there's just these things that we have to look at when we are on the other side of this. This is about analyzing the data.
Hey, Aria, there was something that you told us about a while ago. Araya. Sorry. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
Yeah, the thing that you brought to our attention, I don't know if I'm outing you in a bad way because this is public and streaming, but was kind of like the business view of this virus when it was first erupting. Do you remember that? Does it ring a bell?
Yeah, there was I think, no, I don't remember. What specifically?
It was like your company was advised by a separate consulting company that said, this is what we project is going to happen. Did I just dream that up? No, it was you that did it. Like, was there some advice, some economical advice that a company was giving to your leadership? All right, we'll pass this if you don't remember because it's no fair to pin that on you. But the point that I'm trying to get to was, it seems like, and I want to be totally sensitive of how serious the subject is, but we also want some levity to be able to talk about things without feeling like we're saying the wrong thing. It seems like, and Trump is kind of displaying this for me, that, hey, we're going to lose a percentage of people, but we can't lose the economy because that's worse than losing 2% of the old people. So let's get back to work by Easter. Like, it seems like what I'm starting to feel is this need that we're going to lose people anyway. Let's write them off and let's just get back to work. There's a lot of young, healthy people.
I think I remember now what you're talking about. So I think it's challenging because, and I don't really fault the president. I mean, whatever you like the president in the U.S. or don't, I can't fault the enormous responsibility. In addition to the whole coronavirus situation, the economy and the impact on people's lives also matter. Some of us may be still working through this. Some of us may not be working. Some of us may have savings, but there are people who live month to month who are out of a job. If you work for a certain hotel company that shall not be named, maybe you're furloughed and you can't even get unemployment. And
which one is that?
what happens? That shall not be named. So you might be in a situation where you can't provide for your family. What do you do? If someone comes out and says, hey, we're going to be in lockdown for 3 months and you can't even go more than a couple weeks, how are you going to feed your family? That puts an enormous strain on people. You almost have to take this sort of not day by day, but week by week. And that's what we're seeing. And I don't think it's folks not understanding the gravity of the situation. I just think it has to be cautious because you can't put the countries into a panic. You can't panic people and saying, look, you're going to be stuck at home for months. You're not going to have a job for months. You have to figure out how to feed your kids for the next 3 months with no income and no savings. Good luck.
I'm just going to pick up on that and then do a little bit of levity and trigger Dirk a little bit. Is this at risk of becoming an inverse narrative of what happened during World War II, where we had fucked up our entire fucking continent and the Americans pretty much had to help us pay for rebuilding it? Are we going to see a flip version of that? So we need a Marshall aid to America in the aftermath?
Are you gonna lend lease us or something?
You need a marshal in your territory for that.
No. Marshall Plan was what America did when they supported Europe in their rebuilding, right?
It was named after a guy named Marshall, so you need to have one of those guys first. I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead. Dirk, are you triggered?
No, I'm not. I'm not triggered. I'm not triggered by that. Look, I think that what we have here is an individual who is a bad communicator. Okay, is not communicating kind of properly the idea of, at some point, this idea of being on lockdown, and mind you, not every state out there is. Not every section of the states that are locked down the same way, right? The hotter the zone, probably the more likely that they are locked down and things like that. This Easter bullshit is just Easter bullshit. It's just him saying stuff and whatnot, okay? But there is an element of it that says, at some point, okay, you do begin to get out there. And the whole point of trying to flatten the curve is not so that you can ride out the entirety of the curve. It is, again, so that your healthcare system can keep up with it. That may mean that it is okay for people to begin to go back to work, but not necessarily on Easter Sunday have 1,000 people in a megachurch. If that makes sense, right? Like there is an idea here that eventually you will begin to loosen things up out there so that people can get back to work, not to make the stock market go up, okay? But like Araya was saying, so that people can begin to feed their families, can begin to do those things. Economic activity is something that you probably don't want to be without for too long. There may be a period that you have to be, but then there's other ways that you can maybe get out there. Like right now even, okay? I live in the state of Pennsylvania. The state is technically locked down to non-essential businesses only, right? What are some of those essential businesses though? People that fix cars, okay? Car mechanics,
Our
dealerships,
gun shops?
things like, okay. No, I think the gun shop, I think the gun shops are closed. I'm not entirely sure, but like there are businesses
Did
out
she
there that
say they're not?
she I don't know. I had my headphones on.
Fortifying their location.
Like the idea of rushing it back, okay, doesn't make any sense. Like there are going to be places out there that are just not capable of doing that without re-spiking again, right? There are other places out there that are perhaps, more rural or what have you, that their stores can be open, and people can go back to business, but while also maintaining a level of social distancing in those institutions, right? You may be able to go back into an office environment as long as you take certain precautions after a certain point. But again, because you have hopefully with what we've been trying to put in place and what other countries have been trying to put in place, in terms of some of these harder core lockdowns and things, begun to flatten the curve in those areas.
But I was only half kidding with the World War II analogy, because if you think about it, imagine if someone in a crisis situation like an actual world war was going on about, well, we have to save the stock market, right? Someone would just be ridiculed if they said something like that. That's not what is on the table right now. If you're in a clear and present danger, an actual existential threat, you do not start talking about saving the banks or saving the insurance agencies or stuff like that, because we just need to actually fix this thing and get through it. This is where the health department is pretty much the equivalent to what the military is during a war. You need to fortify that. You need to arm these people, and you need to make them capable of actually fighting off this danger.
To offer a counterpoint to that, back in World War II, a lot of companies operate on pensions. Nowadays, folks' retirement is tied up in the stock market. I've been on numerous conference calls with customers, vendors, family members, and the universal topic talked about is their 401k hits. People are concerned about losing their retirement based on the performance of the stock market. So I would say currently, unlike maybe back in World War II, it is a real concern by everyone who is concerned about their retirement.
Yeah, but that's equivalent to losing your job, right? Whether someone loses the value of their pension, and then the pension won't be able to pay them out their living wage equivalent, right? That's exactly the same as everyone losing their jobs, because there's no more possible consumption. There's no more tourism. There's all of these things are just dying. It's just, we have to figure out how do we then transition, because these people need to live as well. And you can't say, well, we have to save the stock market so the pensioners can get their pensions. Well, what about the people that are in airlines, in hotel business? What about them? They won't be able to make any money either. So they're in the same boat. You have to lift from the bottom, and you have to figure out how to transition this for everyone.
Yeah, and I don't want to sound like a stockbroker like an inverse of a stockbroker, but markets may go down, but they can go up.
Well, and they can. And again, I don't want to put it on the stock market thing. I know that there's too much stuff out there, but it's not just people's 401ks. It's not just rich people who own stock. Okay. I mean, it's workers who even work for those companies that still have pension plans, right? Okay. And working in the pension industry, I can tell you right now that there are a lot of pension plans out there right now that are wondering, whoa, we are now well underfunded. And a lot of them, okay, are your state and municipal employee pension plans in this country. Millions and millions of people, right, where these things are basically backed by the taxpayers, and they were massively underfunded going into this. So it's not just about, some rich guy and whatnot. We're talking about average people here who, hope that their pension plan is still around when they go to retire, which may have been next year, and now it's not.
Well, the most worried guy I saw, and we'll wrap up here in like 3 minutes and then switch over to a different show and do EVE Online news. But the most striking memory I have so far is walking across this Latino guy with his family of 4 or 5 going for a walk, getting some air. And we stopped him, 6 feet apart, and we had a little discussion. And he's like, "How long do you think this can go? Because I just got sent home from work." And he just looked terrified. I mean, this is a guy that works at a restaurant, and restaurants are getting hammered pretty much. They don't need the staff they need to have people dine in. So he's getting, I guess, furloughed or not asked to work for many, many days. And who knows if he'll even still have a job. And that's got to be a pretty scary thing to somebody at that level in society, basically.
I mean, my question
and
is,
if the message was it's going to stay like this till July, at some point he's going to have to make decisions that are not good for the society and this softening the curve of this. He'll have to make decisions based on his family's health and well-being.
And the irony is that, again, a little bit big red boat here, comparing to the war when you didn't have any access to get stuff like chocolate and bananas and things like that. Your supply lines were basically China's. This is not the case now. It's actually the other way around. So how do we recalibrate our entire economic system to actually support people instead of systems? This is the whole thing about the fact that, well, the restaurant guy can actually still on the other side of this get the raw materials and stuff like that, but who is he going to sell it to if these people don't have salaries? So how do we solve that equation? How do we move to a more productivity based than rentier class economy? Because this would benefit everyone, and we can kind of get a new spout of a new capitalism on the other side of this.
You have to retool your entire system to be beneficial for the people, not beneficial for the highest paid or the executives. Let's put it that way.
Man, now you want me to care about people?
All right. We're going to come right back with some EVE Online news. I want to thank once again Tiberius for talking with us today. And Tiberius, you're doing better?
Yeah, doing much better. I'm back at work. Everything is squared away. Working with patients, trying to calm everyone's fears and get everyone on the same page. And I guess like prevent the panic and empower people to put this disease in their hands so that they stop panic buying my fucking toilet paper so I can go get some.
Talking about that, like yesterday, I literally went to not one of the larger supermarkets in the UK, but one of the sort of smaller, sort of mid-range to smaller ones. A good solid 9-10 hours after it initially opened, and there was still toilet paper. So there's hope.
There's hope. Yeah,
There's
right.
hope. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much, everyone, for watching us. We're going to come right back. Stay with the channel. If you guys are in here in our public Discord, stay in the channel. We will be back in just a second, right after this.